that you went away.
Hey guys, if you're new here, my name is Andra and I make commentary videos about public figures and media. If you're not new here, you may have noticed that I'm doing this series about what celebs have been saying about the ongoing situation in Palestine. This series will be going on for a while. I'm trying to do one per day for as long as I can. So if you hate it, I'm sorry, but this is very important and dear to my heart, so I will continue to do it. Today, it is actually about somebody that I really like, so it's gonna be quite sad. Basically, I've known Hozier since like back in Tumblr days. I'm not like very invested in Andrew's personal life, so I don't know much about him, but obviously I do know that he's Irish. So we as collective enjoyers, because I wouldn't say I'm a fan, but I definitely like him, as Hozier enjoyers, we've been waiting to see what he's gonna say about this whole situation, especially because he has been vocal before about Palestine. His response was underwhelming a little bit, and I'm not the only person who thought that. So I'm gonna read you guys the statement that he's made. Ceasefire now. I've been horrified and heartbroken alongside the rest of the world by the brutal and unjustifiable violence enacted against innocent Israeli civilians by Hamas militants, as well as ensuing loss of innocent Palestinian lives through the disproportionate response of Israeli airstrikes on a besieged Gaza, the killing of Palestinians in the West Bank, and the ongoing policy of collective punishment contravening international law. There is no justification for the indiscriminate killing of civilians. The loss of one human life is a tragedy, and each one is a further injury to our shared sense of humanity and its preciousness. My heart goes out to our brothers and sisters from Jewish and Arab communities as the language of dehumanization is employed on our screens and in public discourse. This ongoing nightmare is a horrifying reminder of the abject failure of Western governments to be an honest broker of peace between Israel and Palestine. It is unconscionable that governments on our side of the world, many of which have enabled and ignored this crisis for years, would not call for an immediate ceasefire and independent investigation in the face of this humanitarian catastrophe and commit to meaningful and lasting peace in the region with a renewed sense of urgency. You know how I feel about this by now. I do obviously agree that, loss of civilian life is always sad, but I think it's redundant to talk about it in the conversation of this occupation that is ongoing for 75 years. It didn't start on October the 7th, and when you only focus on everything that's happened from October the 7th onwards, you are ignoring everything that led to that. There have been a lot of crimes committed against Palestinians throughout the years, and it was only a matter of time until they would fight back one way or another. And while I'm sorry that it got to that point, it should never have got to that point, but we expected this to happen. Because when you cage a lion and you use a stick to poke that lion for years and years, if that lion gets out, well, you better fucking run. And it's not ideal, and like violence is not something that needs to be romanticized, but I think when you just focus on that part of history, like this recent one, and you ignore everything else from 1948 onwards, it just doesn't give people the real context. It puts both parties as like equal participants of war, which is just not true. This is not a war, it is occupation, it is genocide. It is not Russia and Ukraine, where both countries are heavily militarily prepared. Ukraine having the whole might of like NATO munitions is just not comparable. And I think the saddest part of this is obviously he's Irish. And the Irish people have long been supporters of Palestine, and while I don't expect him to say, Hamas are amazing, like, of course not. Nobody thinks that violence is beautiful and great. It is more of a matter of, he's not said anything about, freeing Palestine. He just said to have peace between both of them, and yeah, like the two-state solution is not something that most Irish people would support. Most Irish people support the one-state solution because obviously half of Ireland is currently occupied by the UK and they want that half back. So the Irish are in the same situation as the Palestinians, so of course they would feel that way. Another thing that I noticed in this statement is that he outlines Jewish and Arab communities, so always putting the one that is getting the mainstream sympathies in the West first, when the ones who have been wronged more throughout history in that specific situation. Obviously I'm talking about all of history because Jewish people have suffered so much in all of history, and I don't want to take away from that, but just in this situation, it has been the Arabs, the Palestinians, and yeah, I just think that this is not enough. I was expecting him to say free Palestine. He should know what it's like when your people are portrayed as terroristic, violent savages, because that's what happened to the Irish when the Irish Republican Army was enacting, acts of terror, but those acts of terror were coming from a place of, we are oppressed, we want to do anything to free ourselves, and he should understand that. And understand doesn't mean you say it's a good thing or glamorize it, no. You are Irish, like how can you both sides this while you are Irish and have talked about violent oppression and occupation in Ireland? Hello? The bar is so low right now that I sadly expected worse. Not that I consider this acceptable or adequate, but so many celebrities are openly endorsing Israel. I definitely don't think this is the worst statement ever or anything like that. It's middle of the road, better than most to be honest. I just think there's some irony here considering his stances on these things before. Definitely. People have brought up the fact that there was actually another statement after this that was not posted in the original post. So I'm going to read that to you, but I don't think it changes much. I encourage anyone to contact their representatives, sign petitions and organize toward the goal of establishing a ceasefire with a route of creating a new peaceful scenario that encourages both people's rights to safety, dignity and true freedom. Freedom from occupation and freedom from this cycle of violence. Committed international involvement helped bring the peace to the island of Ireland, where I come from. I have to believe it can do so again if the political will and pressure to do so is strong enough. The alternative is a once unimaginable failure of our political leadership to stand up for humanity and international law, the effects of which will be felt for countless generations. I'm not Irish, right? I have zero Irish background, but I just don't think that what he said is like, the fact that Ireland has had a solution brought by the international community, I don't think so, because half of Ireland is still occupied and people are still not happy with that. So I wouldn't really say that the international involvement helped as much here. Maybe it helped to de-escalate the violence, but didn't help to fix the issues. I do want both people to have rights of being safe. I think in my previous videos on the matter I've been quite aggressive, like prior to this situation from the October the 7th. I've been quite aggressive and I've been quite unwilling to understand the Jewish side, but I do believe that Jewish people should remain in Palestine under a binational one-state solution. And I do believe that if Palestinians were to displace the Jewish population from Palestine once it's liberated, they would be doing the same thing that was done to them, and it is not justice. So I think there is a way to discuss a solution for both people without being the two-state solution, because the two-state solution has failed. They have tried that. 1948, Israel broke it. 1967, Israel broke it. Recently, Israel is still continuing to build settlements and expand their land, even though it is not within the borders of the agreed international conventions. This just isn't realistic. We can talk about how much we want peace and love for both sides to be recognized, but this isn't the case. There is no middle ground. You're either anti-ethnic cleansing or you're not. Yes, exactly 100%. It didn't mention Palestine. It's so vague. 100%. I think the sad part is that this is a person who has talked about these things before in a more open manner. So if you look at his statement that he's made in 2021, he talked about signing an open letter calling for Irish Americans in Biden's cabinet to stand with Palestine. He said the Irish experience is all too aware of the centuries-long shadow that can be cast by legacies of settler colonialism, illegal displacement and violence. I signed this yesterday and would urge anyone to share this and sign if they can. So obviously people have been coming to this post saying like what happened to him because this is completely different. I think it's just because he's more mainstream now and he's not some indie artist anymore. Obviously Take Me to Church, everybody knew that song, but I think people in COVID and TikTok and that kind of stuff, like TikTok has helped people discover a lot of new artists or artists that they were not new but they never knew about. So I think he's probably just scared. I don't think it's good to see. It's more like a blowdown, especially given the beautiful words and lyricism of Son Upon Leda, his song. I listen to that to this day and still cry when I hear it. I might make a video just about that if you're interested, just my thoughts about the lyrics and like dissecting them. The main point of the song is about women's bodily autonomy and like abuse of women's bodies by men, by patriarchy, reproductive rights, all that. But he portrays the female body as an equivalent of Jerusalem that is being torn apart by the settler colonial entity of Israel. And it is such a beautiful song. It's so beautiful. And it just makes me sad that he could go from that to this. And the fact that he's talked about other issues with more passion. Like, I feel like the way he approached the Ukraine war has been a lot more passionate. And Ukraine has been a country that, quite frankly, weaponized their famine. There is still it's a very debated subject, so I'm just not going to get into it too much, but the famine that happened in Ukraine didn't only happen in Ukraine, and there is a lot of dispute around whether that famine was intentional or not in the 1930s. Personally, I don't think there is enough proof to say it was intentional, but it doesn't have to be intentional in order to be an incredibly sad event that probably traumatized a lot of people. Any famine would. It doesn't have to be an intentional act, but Ukraine today compared this with the very intentional famine in Ireland, and I don't think it's very respectful to use the worst moments of people's histories. Zelensky also compared what's happening in Ukraine now with the colonialism that Ireland has suffered, and I don't think they are comparable. We can put two things that are bad next to each other and they still would not be at the same scale, and that's okay. You don't have to, like, for example, if I'll just use a very random example, you get sexually harassed by a random person, you're not essayed, but it's still something that can be sad and traumatizing, even though it's not as bad as being essayed. I just don't think this, like, Operation Olympics is pleasant, and I think Zelensky trying to appeal to people's deepest traumas to get money is quite insidious. So yeah, Andrew has supported Ukraine a lot more than I feel like he's done with Palestine. So if you can see here, there have been 2 posts on his main feed about refugees in Ukraine, which is great, I'm not against the post. I just feel like you posted all this stuff about Palestinians on your story, but this stuff deserves to be on the main feed. Is this better for your aesthetic than the Palestinian struggle? Like, sorry, that is not aesthetic enough. He also brought a Ukrainian actress to be part of his song that is called Eat Your Young. So this song is about kind of the cycles of abuse and violence that get passed down from parents to children. I think it's very suitable to bring a Ukrainian person to be in that, obviously, but spotlighting Ukrainian actors and artists and stuff, but not doing the same for Palestinians, again, just kind of proves the double standards, that he put more effort into his advocacy for Ukrainians than for Palestinians. Of course, he got called out a lot for this. So since getting called out, he's been posting a few stories about it. So one of them is from Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a great organization, actually. It is good to see Jewish people being on the right side of history, but I just don't think that this is sufficient. Why are you not centering Palestinian voices in this situation? Do you think they're too controversial? Like, you could have reposted something from a Palestinian journalist or something, you know what I mean? Like, just why would you only post from Jewish organizations? You can do both Jewish and Palestinian organizations. Then he showed that there is like a petition for Irish Writers for Palestine. He reshared that again. It's kind of bare minimum stuff, if I must be honest. And I'm not saying every single artist needs to be a politician or like deeply political, but when you make your career from being this person that talks about a lot of political things in his music, like religious trauma, colonialism, cycles of abuse and violence, gender roles, female, feminism and bodily autonomy for women, and that kind of stuff. You talk about all these like very deep issues, only to not actually practice what you preach in your songs, but in real life, it just doesn't make sense to me. And like, I'm a big fan of his, right? Well, like I said, enjoyer of his music. I wouldn't say fan, because when you talk about fans, it's like knowing people's personal lives and like stuff outside of the art. I'm a fan of his music, not necessarily of him, because I don't really know much about him. But I really think his music is beautiful, and he is one of the few male artists that managed to hit this like beautiful lyricism, almost like poetry, and like just this male sensibility in his music. He's so vulnerable and he shows a lot of emotion without being too fragile. It's the perfect balance. I love that music. I've listened to that music so long, since Tumblr days, like since Take Me to Church was viral, and I've been always kind of fangirling over his new releases and stuff. Like I remember when he released that song, I think it's called Someone New. I haven't listened to that song in ages because it's not, I like more the sadder, deeper stuff than that one. But that song, it had Natalie Dormer from Game of Thrones in the video, and I was like fangirling because I have such a big crush on her. So that was one like moment that I can remember. So I'm genuinely like, I love his music, and I'm not gonna give up on supporting him because I think his heart is in the right place, just his words are not. But I am disappointed, and I have to talk about it because, you know, a few of the artists in this series that I'm making are gonna be hurtful because they're gonna be like personal faves that I care about, but you know, it has to be like that. I've seen people complaining, you know, that he talked about Iran and the situation there. I don't understand why. I think his statement, if you read in the description box of A Swan Upon Layla, you will see what he says about Iran. It's not that hard-hitting. It is kind of on par with what he's been saying about Palestine and Israel. He's not openly condemning the government, he's just condemning the human rights violations, which is fair enough. I don't have that strong of an opinion about what's happening in Iran. I think a lot of it is, well, you have to go back in history and see where this religious fundamentalism stems from, and you will understand a lot more. But I don't think it's comparable. Again, there's two different situations. I think that out of these three, Palestine, Iran, and Ukraine, he's definitely seemed to care more about Ukraine publicly, at least, which is quite a shame, because I think these other two situations have been not more important, but like going on for longer, if that makes sense. So if you can see here, he's mentioned stuff like this before in other music, talking about Bethlehem, obviously the city where Jesus was born. It's a Palestinian city in the West Bank now. So I'm sure that, you know, he does have some sort of level of education, as most Irish people are kind of at least semi-aware of what's going on in Palestine, if not acutely aware. Why is Hozier not reposting from Palestinian accounts? Israel doesn't want a permanent ceasefire. We cannot live in a delusional state right now with so many dying in Palestine/Gaza due to the Israeli government's desire for ethnic cleansing. It's straight up racism. And you know, I'm not the only person who is disappointed by this whole situation. I will read you what a few fans of his have been saying as well. Just to be real with you all, this account literally started as a Hozier Stan account and has quickly become a pro-Palestine activism account. The way it took Andy so long to post kind of sickens me, considering how vocal he has been before. He's always been pro-Palestine. That's not a secret. I never humored the idea that he was a Zionist, because we know he isn't based on how pro-Palestine he's been before. However, the reality is, as a wealthy white man who makes his living advocating for and uplifting black and brown lives, is impossible to ignore throughout all of his work since he first kicked off and made it big. Y'all's inability to hold your faves accountable and to admit that they have flaws is concerning. I love Hozier and his music facts, and I'm glad he's being much more vocal about his support for Palestine. But you all need to look deeper and ask yourself, what if my fave didn't support Palestine? What then? And if you don't know what you'd do, it's time for some self-reflection. I love you all, I love Hozier, and while I'm disappointed it took a while, I'm glad he finally came around. Hold your faves accountable, hold your loved ones close, and remember to pray and advocate for Palestine. It's beautiful, he said. And one last post about somebody who seems to be a lot more involved in his life than I am, so I don't know how much of this is actually true. I will take this as good faith. What's confusing to me is that even if you feel this statement is too neutral for your liking, what can be said about Andrew is that years before this round of atrocities happened, he didn't just throw a check at problems and say he did his part. This guy was at protests, pro-Palestinian shows, providing resources, using his platform to call it what it is. Even some months ago, before the latest bombings, he was doing a benefit show. On top of that, he's also always been very specific about calling out the powers that be and the people that use those powers to inflict harm on others. Colonizers, Zionists, late-stage capitalism, etc. Never in his words Has he ever said violence is justified with violence? To my remembrance, but even so, when has he ever glorified the use of violence in protest? Even in his protest songs, even in his clearly educated opinion of them, he's never stood behind the violence it took to get there, even when he knows the fight is worthy. So I'm not understanding why his plea for peace, and specifically asking it from the people he's been pointing the finger at, Zionist governments built on colonization rules, etc., which he does again here while expressing concern over lives lost on both sides and pointing out how this is and has been very one-sided for a long time, is too neutral. His concern is and has always been for the people suffering at the hands of power they have no control over, and while one side is wrong, which again he points out, the loss of life of people on either side with no way out is still tragic. How is this any different from what he's been expressing and standing for all these years? Has he not gained enough goodwill from his actions or even spoken enough from his own mouth to understand any of these things? Or okay, so what I'm gonna say about this is I don't know how much of this he's done because it's not recorded, right? Like I've not been able to find it online, but I do believe that he must have done some sort of charity shows, or this would not even be a conversation. The problem here, I think, and I hope that you follow me here, is that I've been protesting and advocating for Palestine for many years. This is the first time that I'm seeing people actually being aware and trying to educate themselves on the topic. When there was a round of bombings in 2021, nobody cared. Well, I'm not saying nobody, but like not the numbers that care now. When Shireen Abu Akleh was killed last year, 2022, few people cared. It just kind of disappeared after a while. Israel admitted that they killed her and there were no consequences because by the time they admitted, the media didn't care about the story anymore. This year is the first time that I'm seeing collective effort within the international community to go and do organized things, protesting, fundraising. I've seen huge fundraisers. Unfortunately, that money is hard to get into Gaza, but the intentions are there. People are using their voice. People are reading books about Palestine. People are looking at Palestinian movies. All these things that have not happened before. And his statement is quite neutral, yes. Even if his past statements were all pro-Palestine unequivocally, most of his fans would probably not have paid attention because people were not as aware of the topic as they are this year, right? So people know about this topic this year a lot more than they used to know. Therefore, his statement should have been stronger because we don't know what he said 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Some of us don't watch all the stories of celebrities that they post on Instagram, and we don't keep a record of everything that they say. So how am I, as a casual fan, supposed to know what he did and how many charity shows he hosted or been to? I cannot know that. So when you see just this statement in isolation, as somebody who maybe just learned about Palestine this month or last month when the situation started, maybe you just learned about it then, you see this statement and it does feel neutral without all the baggage that you're saying is behind it. So please try to be understanding of this point of view as well, because I think we all like him and we all agree, between the people that have made all these comments in this video, it is not a malicious normie person who's trying to take down a celebrity like maybe some of people who are hating on, I don't know, Selena or Justin are not actually fans. But with him, you can tell the tenderness and the care in the comments. And the comments are trying to bring to light an issue. And they're trying to hold him accountable, not send hate or threats his way. So let's all be reasonable, even if we share different opinions on this. So since this whole situation started, this video of him was obviously posted online and went semi-viral in this community.
I come from, and I say this because what we've seen since the nightmare of October the 7th, as we know, I don't need to remind you, is another day, another nightmare after nightmare after nightmare. And if you could, I just want to mention that I come from a country that faced centuries of violence, centuries of sectarian violence and occupation, and it was ended, it was brought to a political and diplomatic end with the involvement of the United States. And today the United States voted against in the General Assembly. And last week there were votes for a ceasefire, And the United States, which has a permanent seat on the Security Council, has consistently voted it down, has vetoed it or cancelled the vote. And so I come from a country whose peace that we enjoy now was as a direct cause of the involvement, the direct involvement of the United States and the international community. And so that's why I believe that international investment in an issue like this can really help. And it can feel so hopeless, and it can feel there's so much energies of hopelessness and powerlessness in a moment like this. But we do have representation, and we have access to our respective representations coming from democracies on the global stage. And we can remind that representation to represent us in our collective compassion, our collective humanity, and our collective grief. And so all I would say, if you would consider it, that if you are moved to reach out to your representation and to ask them to represent you on that basis, I would love for you to consider it. That is all.
I think it is a beautiful sentiment. I think being a person who loves peace is amazing. I don't have that idealism left in me anymore, because I think it is extremely naive to think that our representatives, as he says, actually care about what we think. I was like that a while ago. I made a few videos on this channel where I was talking about electoral politics and, you know, voting for Biden and stuff. I take that back. That is one thing that I completely changed my mind on. I don't think that any of these people represent us. And while I think his intention and sentiment, they're beautiful, I just don't think that he understands the gravity of the situation. Yes, the UN could have prevented this. The UN could have prevented the war in Ukraine as well, when, you know, Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 were signed and Ukraine didn't uphold their end. They could have tried to do something to prevent war before it started. There's a lot of things that the UN could realistically be doing, but they don't care enough. And also, yeah, there are these countries like the US that have power to veto, and they will abuse that power. So that power should be revoked. I think, yeah, it is a beautiful sentiment. He's a kind soul. You can tell he does care. When he talks about peace in Ireland, where he comes from, I'd like to ask, you know, who this piece is for, because obviously there's been something. I'm filming this on the 26th of November, by the way. So there has been a terrible situation that happened in Ireland a few days back. And so I don't think there is full peace in Ireland. Half of Ireland is occupied. Obviously I'm not Irish, so I don't want to speak over him. If he's satisfied with the current status quo, then who am I to say? But in my opinion, Ireland should be united and freed and, you know, independent, not part of the UK. That's just my thought. And the same thing with Palestine. I would like for him to just say free Palestine, because he's going around words, and yeah, peace is beautiful, but when people are imposed violence on them, peace is not something that you can ask them to just accept, because the peace that a lot of people, including Zionists, ask Palestinians to accept is not actual peace. It's more like a return to the previous status quo, and we don't want that. We want freedom for these people. That's what I'm gonna say today. Yeah, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, comment down below what you think about this. Would you like me to talk about anyone else in specific? Yeah, subscribe to this channel for more. See you guys next time, bye.